Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. In the name of Allah, the All-Merciful, the All-Compassionate. Fatima Zahra, the daughter of the Prophet, peace be upon them, is to have thus related an event. My father, the Prophet of Allah, came to my house one day and said to me, "Peace be upon you, Fatima." I replied, "And upon you be peace." Then he said, "I feel weakness in my body." I said, "Allah protects you from weakness, father." He said, "Fatima, please bring the Yemeni cloak and cover me with it." So I brought the Yemeni cloak and covered him with it. Then I looked at him and saw that his face was shining like a full moon with its glory and splendor. After a while, my son Hassan came in and said, "Peace be upon you, mother." I replied, "And upon you peace, O light of my eyes and the delight of my heart." He then said, "Mother, I smell a fragrance so sweet and so pure as that of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, your grandfather is lying underneath the cloak." Hassan went near the cloak and said, "Peace be upon you, my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my son and the master of my fountain Kauthar. You are given the permission to enter." So Hassan entered the cloak with him. After a while, my son Hussein came in and said, "Peace be upon you, mother." I replied, "And upon you peace, O light of my eyes and the delight of my heart." He then said, "Mother, I smell a sweet fragrance like that of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, your grandfather and your brother are lying underneath the cloak." Hussein stepped toward the cloak and said, "Peace be upon you, my grandfather, the chosen of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my son and the interceder of my followers. You are given the permission to enter." So Hussein entered the cloak with them. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. After a while, Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Abi Talib came in and said, "Peace be upon you, O daughter of the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "And upon you peace, O father of Hassan and the commander of the faithful." He then said, "Fatima, I smell a sweet fragrance like that of my brother, my cousin, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, he is underneath the cloak with your two sons." So Ali went near the cloak and said, "Peace be upon you, Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my brother, my legatee, my successor, and my standard bearer. You are given the permission to enter." So Ali entered the cloak with them. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Then I stepped forward and said, "Peace be upon you, my father, O Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you peace, my daughter, O part of myself. You are given the permission to enter." So I entered the cloak with them. Getting together underneath the cloak, my father, the Prophet of Allah, held the two ends of the cloak and raised his right hand towards the heavens and prayed, "O Allah, these are the people of my household, the Ahlul Bayt. They are my confidants and my supporters. Their flesh is my flesh, and their blood is my blood. Whoever hurts them, hurts me too. Whoever displeases them, displeases me too. I am at war with those at war with them, and I am at peace with those at peace with them. I am the enemy of their enemies, and I am the friend of their friends. They are from me, and I am from them. O Allah, bestow your blessings, benevolence, forgiveness, and your pleasure upon me and upon them, and remove impurity from them, and keep them thoroughly pure." Then the Lord Almighty Allah said, "O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas, and the sailing ships, but for the love of these five lying underneath the cloak." Gabriel, the trusted angel, asked, "Who are under the cloak?" The Almighty answered, "They are the household of the Prophet and the assets of prophethood. They are Fatima, her father, her husband, and her two sons." Allah replied, "Yes, you are given the permit." Gabriel said, "O Lord, may I fly to earth to be the sixth of them?" Allah replied, "Yes, you are given the permission." Gabriel the trusted landed near them and said, "Peace be upon you, O Prophet of Allah. The All-Highest conveys His peace on you and His greetings and says, By my honor and glory, O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas, and the sailing ships, but for your sake and love. God has given me permission to enter the cloak with you. May I join you, O Prophet of Allah?" The Prophet replied, "And peace be upon you, O trusted bearer of Allah's revelations. You are granted the permission." So Gabriel entered the cloak with us, and said to my father, "Allah sends His revelations to you. Verily Allah's desire is to remove blemish from you, O people of household Ahlul Bayt, and purify you with a perfect purification." Then Ali said to my father, "O Prophet of Allah, tell me, what significance has Allah given for getting together underneath this cloak?" The Prophet replied, "By Him who rightfully appointed me a prophet, and chose me a messenger for the salvation of the mankind, whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mention this event, Allah will bestow on them His blessings and mercy. Angels will encircle them, asking Allah the remission of their sins until the assembly disperse." So Ali said, "Verily, by the Lord of Kaaba, we and our followers are the winners." Then my father replied, by him who rightfully appointed me a prophet and chose me a messenger for the salvation of the mankind. Whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mention this event, there shall remain none grieved, but Allah will remove his grief. There shall remain none distressed, but Allah will dispel his distress. There shall remain none wish seeker, but Allah will grant his wish. Ali happily said, verily by the Lord of the Kaaba, we and our followers are the winners and the blessed in this world and the next.
Jazakallah khair jazak. Thank you so much, Brother Shabir, for that wonderful tilawat of the Holy Quran and English translation of Hadith Qissa. If we could please have another loud salawat for Brother Shabir. Allahumma salli. Now I will kindly request our dear brother Muhammad Ibrahim to recite a salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Salawat. Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Me and my brothers and father, we will drop tears and miss you. Before you go, Mother, will you take my soul with you? Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Mother Zahra, I will miss you. For you to stay, Mother Zahra, will always be my only wish. You were attacked by people. In my eyes they are nothing worth. They killed you and Brother Mohsen. He died before the time of birth. Take me with you, oh Mother. Don't leave me here on this earth. My tears are now dropping faster, and every tear is so true. Before you go, Mother, will you take my soul with you? Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Your pain is living in my heart. Your care and your love I will keep. With you I will spend the night, and by your grave I will sleep. I don't think my eyes will close. My eyes can't close, they just weep. What shall I do? You're not here. And with my tears I'm drowning deep. My life is now getting harder. How can I live my life through? Before you go, oh Mother, will you take my soul with you? Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Me and my brothers and father, we will drop tears and miss you before you go. Oh, Mother, will you take my soul with you? Mother Zahra, I will miss you. Salawat.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Brother Muhammad, for that wonderful salam. At this time, we kindly request Brother Ali Zadi to please read another salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah.
صلوات. شکستہ پہلو سے میرے یہ در ہٹا دو خدا را، مدد کرو فضا، مدد کرو فضا، مدد کرو فضا، تمہاری زحمتیں جلدی سے اب تمام کروں، میں جاتے جاتے جہاں سے انہیں سلام کروں، وہ دیکھو آ گئے بابا، اٹھا دو دے کے سہارا، مدد کرو فضا، مدد کرو فضا، مدد کرو فضا، گرا ہے ٹوٹ کے آنگن میں گوشوارا میرا، ہے کان زخمی ستمگر نے اس طرح مارا، علی نہ دیکھیں خدا را، چھپا دو زخم یہ میرا، مدد کرو فضا، مدد کرو فضا، مدد کرو فضا، چلو مدینے میں ایک ایک گھر پہ جائیں گے، غدیر کیا ہے انہیں یاد ہم دلائیں گے، فدق تو چھن گیا میرا، یہ حق نہ چھینے علی کا، مدد کرو فضا مدد کرو فضا مدد کرو فضا سہارا دے کے مجھے لے چلو خدا را وہاں وہ رسی باندھ کے حیدر کو لے گئے ہیں جہاں نہ اب ہو دیر خدا را ہے میرا مولا اکیلا مدد کرو فضا مدد کرو فضا مدد کرو فضا شکستہ پہلو سے میرے یہ در ہٹا دو خدا را مدد کرو فضا مدد کرو فضا
Jazakallah khair jaza. Thank you so much, Brother Ali, for that wonderful recitation. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah. Inshallah, before we call our respected say to the member, just a couple of quick announcements. So inshallah, tomorrow, Tuesday and Wednesday, the next 3 nights, the program will be starting with Salat al-Isha promptly at 7 p.m. So 7 p.m. with Salat al-Isha, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If anyone is interested in contributing to these Ayam Fatimiyya Majalis, please feel free to see Brother Amjad Sabar, Dr. Ghulam Abbas, myself, or any of the board of directors. And we'll be happy to take that as well if you have any questions. Without further ado, we kindly request our dear respected Sayyid Sulaiman Hassan to please address the member. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And if we could please have everyone come up as close to the front as possible, inshallah, as we'll be expecting more people in the future, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه المنتجبين. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today is the second majlis in remembrance and in honor and in grief over the martyrdom of the beloved daughter of our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And the one who supported his mission and prophethood from the first days, and who irrigated the garden of Imamat with her sincerity and with her sacrifice. And that is the beloved leader of the ladies of heaven and the heir and memory of our Prophet Fatimah Zahra alayha salam. Yesterday I mentioned that just like there is an ambiguity within Laylatul Qadr, there is an ambiguity and a mystery within Sayyida Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And I don't want to repeat that discussion or focus entirely on it, but I want to make one point that is sometimes forgotten or neglected, in particular by people who have an academic interest or are very enthusiastic about learning from history and from the, unfortunately, too few narrations that we have about Ahlul Bayt, because much of that history has not reached us. So there is a misconception that some people have about the nature of history. That misconception is this: that in the time of the Prophet, because people are living with the Prophet and they are hearing him and they see him, they have a better understanding and a more accurate understanding of the Prophet. But then after that time, when there is distance, and maybe some people now are becoming Muslim who don't even speak Arabic as their native language, so then their imagination is what becomes the basis of their relationship or their understanding of the Prophet, and maybe they assume the Prophet was some supernatural figure, or there were miracles taking place every day within Medina, and there was a cloud over the Prophet's head, and there were stones and pebbles that were doing tasbih. And so some people think that this maybe image of the Prophet, it came because people were not there and they did not know the actual context of those events, and they may not even speak the language. So it is kind of a mystery for them. It is a legend and it is not history. You may be familiar, because the followers of Ahlul Bayt sometimes, they are also accused of exaggerating the virtues, not of Ahlul Bayt, but of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt. Because there is nothing that Ahlul Bayt had, and there is nothing that Ahlul Bayt were, and there is nothing that Ahlul Bayt knew that did not come to them from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. What they knew, they learned from him. What they were, they became because of him. And what they had, they were given through him and by him. And so it is not that the maqam and the rank of Ahlul Bayt was exaggerated by the followers of Ahlul Bayt, but rather it was that the rank and the maqam of Rasulullah was neglected and forgotten or never understood by those who left Ahlul Bayt. And this was not an exaggeration, but rather it was an elevation, and it was a putting within the proper place of the rank that Allah had given to His Prophet and the family of the Prophet. So why is the reality the opposite? And And in fact, when you are too close, you will not be able to understand. The reality is that when somebody is so great that their worldly existence is almost an obstacle to understanding their true reality, that distance can actually sometimes help you not be distracted by some of those small details. Most of us can probably relate to this. Sometimes a husband and a wife, they get into an argument. Sometimes it is friends. Sometimes it is children when they are playing. And there is a discussion or an argument. Something else is really the issue. But when I am arguing with you, I mention one example. I say that, you were supposed to do the groceries and you were supposed to bring this one thing and you didn't do it. Now, if the other person is wise, are they going to get stuck and say, no, actually, it's not that big a deal that I forgot to bring the milk? Do you think not having milk for a few hours or even a day if you have to get it the next day, that is the problem? Or not taking out the garbage, or for the children, maybe they didn't clean their room or they didn't empty the dishwasher, or whatever. In our life we have these examples in family, in our other relationships, maybe at work. If you are wise, then you will separate yourself and get some distance and say, what is actually going on? Maybe there are 100 other things that I neglected or I forgot, and this is just one example. It isn't even the most important example. And so if I respond that, well, this is the reason why I didn't bring the milk, because they didn't have it, or I was in a rush, or whatever, maybe I have a justification for not bringing that one item on the grocery list. But the underlying point is not about that one item. And the underlying point of why my mother or why my spouse or why my friend may be upset with me, that point is still valid. When you are too close, then in English we call this losing the forest for the trees. I see so many trees, I say, where is the forest? When in reality, you have to separate yourself a little bit, and then you can see that those trees, they are the forest. Sometimes this happens to us in life, where maybe a newborn child, and the parents are overwhelmed with emotion and with love and with fear that, am I going to be able to raise this child and take care of them and protect them and fulfill my responsibility to Allah and my own wishes and dreams and the expectations of my family? And sometimes an elder in the family, maybe your mother, maybe your father, maybe your mother-in-law or father-in-law or a grandparent or an elder, they come and they say something, and it's very simple. Don't ever neglect the tears of your child and try to suppress them. Don't ever be absent when your family needs you, even if you have a very important responsibility at work or something very simple. And at that time, you think maybe they were also overcome with emotion, and they just said something. And then years later, you realize that that one sentence, it was one sentence, just an advice on, when you have a new child, don't forget your spouse. When you are overwhelmed, then make sure that you do your daily responsibilities. It's a simple sentence. But later on, when you are older and wiser, you realize that it wasn't emotion, it wasn't just something that people say at times like that, but your mother or father or grandparents, they were speaking from a lifetime of wisdom and experience. And maybe advice that they received from their own elders 30 years ago, or mistakes that they made and they want to guide you not to make. And so you see that sometimes in the moment, you actually are less able to understand, not because the action or the speech is not relevant or obvious, but because you are not able to understand the horizon and the wisdom and the meaning of the person who is speaking. And so sometimes you can only appreciate your parents when you have children. After that, I can say, "Oh Allah, forgive my parents." But it is kind of something that I am saying and not understanding. Sometimes you can only appreciate your elders, whether or not you have children, but when you are past middle age. There's a time when you look forward to getting older. Because if you are a kid, when you get older, then you get more independent. Maybe you get a driver's license. Maybe you can open your own bank account. Maybe you can make your own independent decisions. You can rent a car without having to have a parent there. So there is a time in life when every tomorrow it brings more strength and more independence, and you feel like you are looking forward to it. And then you come to a certain point, every day there is a new white hair, there is a new wrinkle, there is a new responsibility. And so now you look at life differently. You're still grateful to Allah for every day, for every breath. But your perspective is different because now you know that life is not infinite. The moments of your life, they are not infinite. You read Wal Asr and maybe you memorized Surah Al-Asr when you were 6 years old or 7 years old or even younger. But when you are a child and you say Wal Asr innal insana lafi khusr, you think time is unlimited. When is it going to end? The weekend comes, it's forever. Throw my book bag away, I don't need to worry about school. Summer vacation begins and it feels like an eternity. Whereas when you get to a certain age, now you read Surah Al-Asr and you realize that even if you have a week off, you're already worried what's going to happen when this week comes to an end because I have so many responsibilities and so many things that I need to take care of. So your responsibilities, they change your horizon and your perspective. And this is the reality with respect to Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi and Ahlul Bayt. The Muslims who were there, they said, this is Rasulullah. He wakes up and we see him, he goes, he does wudu, he eats with us, he smiles and he is very friendly with us and he walks, and so he seems just like a regular person. And then they might think that maybe those people who are far away, they think that Rasulullah is an angel. They think that Rasulullah is something supernatural. But we are here, we saw, we know. In reality, the fact that they saw the Prophet is an obstacle for them to realize that Rasulullah goes where even Jibreel is not able to access. Because of the limitation of their horizon, if they were to see Jibreel, they would say, wow, now I'm having a mystical experience. Now I am seeing a miracle. But if they see the Prophet, just a person, he doesn't have wings, he's not made of light, he doesn't go to sleep. See the difference in the horizon? But which reality is more accurate about understanding Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi? He is greater than Jibreel and Mikael and Al-Malaikatul Muqarrabun, the proximate angels with the highest rank. He is greater than all of them in his spiritual rank, even though he is a human being walking on this earth. Innama ana basharun mithlukum is true. I am a man like you. But yuha ilayya. But Allah has honored me with wahi, which is a rank that is above even the greatest angels. So now, Some people, they have the intellect and the humility to say, yes, I can see Rasulullah as a human being, but this is not his reality. What I see is but the smallest manifestation of the greatness of the Prophet, and in the beauty of his physical appearance and the fragrance that is associated with him, then he is beyond any example or any equal in humanity. Yet even if we look at that beauty and we look at that fragrance and we look at all of the superficial greatness of the Prophet that we can perceive, that is not anything but a drop in the ocean of the true greatness of the Prophet, because his soul is so elevated that Allah takes him to Mi'raj. His soul is so elevated that the angels consider it an honor when they are able to approach the person of the Prophet. And because of that limitation of us human beings, and most of us don't have that humility and we don't have that contemplation or that intellect, it is a mercy for us to have some distance. This is not converting history into a legend in the sense of being false. This is instead recognizing that sometimes what you can see in history is but a very pale shadow or reflection of the true brilliance of what Allah wanted to shine from heaven onto this small planet that we call Earth. We think that this is the fact, and everything beyond that is just imagination. That is a materialist and a secular worldview. But in reality, what you can see is just the shadow. The reality is much greater and much more radiant. And if you don't see the shadow and you contemplate about the greatness of the Prophet, then that is going to be a much more accurate depiction. And this is why sometimes there are people who know stories that are not well attested. But they might know the Prophet better than somebody who knows sources and a great deal of scholarship. This is a point that you don't have to take it on faith. You can do your own research and your own contemplation and reach your own conclusions. My entire talk today, I am not expecting anybody to agree with me, but I am just presenting to you certain things that I hope you will think about, and inshallah they will be of benefit. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Just imagine two people, one is a university professor, and I don't want to disparage scholarship. When you have scholarship, then you will always have the potential for a greater insight and a greater wisdom than without scholarship. What I want to say is that scholarship is not a substitute for faith. Some people, they think that scholarship, if you go to college, then you lose your values. No. Many people, they do go and study and then they start to doubt that this is not what I learned in Sunday school. The point is not that scholarship is an obstacle. The point is that if you think that you are going to get faith through scholarship, then you are making a mistake. That scholarship, all the facts that you learn, they just give you the potential. But you can use all of that knowledge to build a bomb to destroy societies, or to develop new technologies and new treatments that can cure people of diseases. Scholarship is good. And don't say that, well, because so-and-so they studied and they developed, they went into the defense industry and they only used their knowledge to destroy humanity, that you shouldn't have the scholarship or you shouldn't have the training. No, the proper response is we should have the training, but then rather than going into a field that destroys, if you want to go in the defense industry, then go in some area that at least provides protection from attack, rather than destruction. Or go into an area that provides a cure or help for humanity rather than a harm. So it's not a matter of doubting the importance or criticizing the importance of scholarship, but of recognizing that this is just going to give you potential to do good or bad. Faith is of a different quality. So imagine two people, one is a scholar, and you bring them a riwayah, and they say, no, this is not found in good sources. This hadith is da'if. Rightly or wrongly, there are different types of scholarship, different opinions. My point is not whether we agree or we disagree with somebody's classification, but they have that ability to say, I know what the source is, this source is questionable for this reason, this text is maybe doubtful, or so they are a scholar. And then there is another person who is very pious. And when they find out Allah has recommended something, they say that I need to figure out how I can do it. And if they find out that Allah has obligated something, then they will move heaven and earth. It doesn't matter who is going to be happy and who is going to be upset. It doesn't matter if it's going to make them popular or unpopular. It doesn't matter if it's going to give them profit or loss. They say, if this is wajib, I will do it. If this is haram, I will avoid it. Now, by the standards of our, now we're in the majlis and I've built a foundation. But normally, which one do we think knows better? Our society and our culture, they will say that that person who has the scholarship, they know better. And sometimes I've seen children, they don't take their parents seriously. Now, if you need facts, then maybe your parents, they have not studied the seerah in depth. Maybe they don't have that much knowledge of Arabic, and so you won't get facts from them. But knowing the Prophet is not about facts. Let me give you just one example. I would request, although it's not customary in majalis, everybody to raise your hand. If you have heard the story of the Jewish lady who used to throw dirt on the Prophet in Mecca, and then she got sick and she didn't throw dirt, and the Prophet came and said, where is she? How many of you have heard that story? Everyone here has heard that story. We don't have any source for it. There is no reason to believe that ever took place. I hope nobody's faith is shaken. But there is no source that we can say, yes, this is the... I'm not saying we don't have a sahih hadith for you to come and say, well, let's try to, see if we can work with that weak hadith. In our early ahadith and sources, that story is not something that we can attest to with any kind of certainty or any kind of authenticity. But all of us know, maybe some of us have been that person who used to see this story recited and tears would come to their eyes. Or whenever we think about that, we say, this is how I need to be. Does this story represent everything that we know with 100% certainty to be the akhlaq and the character and the manner of acting with people that we learn from Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi? Yes. This story, at the level of being a reflection of the character of the Prophet, is beyond question. Now, does it matter if the lady was Jewish or Christian or mushrik? No. Does it matter if that story took place in Mecca or Medina? No. Does it matter if it wasn't that she was sick, but just that she was busy or forgot? No. Does it matter if this story took place or didn't take place? Even that doesn't matter. Because when the Quran says that there is an uswa hasana in our Prophet, that there is a beautiful example of noble character in our Prophet. When the Prophet says, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, O Messenger Allah, who has created all of humanity, and for whom the entire history from Adam until the Day of Judgment is just like what is in the palm of my hand. He can see the noblest and the most pure and all of his creation. And when he says to the Prophet that you are on khuluq azim, great character, then what is the story? Even this story is just a poor reflection of the nobility and the generosity and the forgiveness and the mercy and the beauty of the character of the Prophet. Do you see the difference in perspective? Now, I am not saying that therefore just make up any story as long as it's beautiful, it is okay. I am not saying that scholarship is not important. What I am saying is that when you hear the musibah of Imam Hussein, and in your mind you are thinking, was the riwayah like this or was the riwayah like that? I can't cry because I'm wondering about the history. If you have a seminar about what took place in Karbala and we have an academic discussion, then yes, ask me what are the maqatil and what are the sources and what was the order of the battle and who was martyred where and how did it take place. And if I don't know, then I should look for the answer. That is the proper context for your mind to be thinking what was the structure and what was the order and what is authentic and what is inauthentic. And that is a very important part of our life. But if in the musibah I am thinking only about the history and the footnotes, then there is something missing in my heart and in my soul. And recognize the value of both. I hope the point is clear. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. There are some people who go to the other extreme. They say it doesn't matter, just you have to make people cry. No. Ahlul Bayt lived a life. And although their material body was not the most important part of their existence, although the actual historical events of Karbala are not the heart and the soul and the reality of the battle, this was also one part of the trial and the test and the sacrifice that Ahlul Bayt made and the experience that Allah gave them. To get the history right to the best of our ability is important. But recognize that because of the oppression of the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, because of the nature of the passage of time, you can never get the full picture. You can never get 100% accurate picture. And even if you could, that would not be the reality of who Rasulullah was, who Fatima Zahra was, who Amir al-Mu'mineen or Imam Hassan or Imam Hussein or Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam were. So do the best you can and value those narrations that have come to you, but don't get lost and think that this is going to give you knowledge. That expert that I mentioned to you, it wouldn't make a difference if they were Muslim or atheist. They can be a scholar of the socio-political or economic situation of Arabia at the time of the Prophet, and they might know it better than you and I. They might know that historical source, that geography, that history, how climate had changed the trade routes of Arabia on the eve of the beginning of Islam better than you and me. Does that mean they know Rasulullah better than you and me? If I am a lover of the Prophet, well, that depends by how much I am inspired by the Prophet. That depends on whether I follow and I obey and I emulate or not. And this brings me to the point that I promised we would address today. Fatimiyya is a very sensitive time. And again, everyone, they will make their own conclusions whenever we have sensitive topics in our community. Then the first thing people do is they say, let's find what our fuqaha say. Any controversy, how should we do azadari, matam, or our mourning? And I say that, this is what you should do. Somebody will say, no, I found a mujtahid, they have the opposite fatwa. You're telling me this is not the way to do it? No. This is also a scholar, they are a mujtahid, they are a faqih. They are in Najaf or Qom just as well. So, really what we have done is we have decided what we want to do. Then we are shopping. Can we find a scholar to support what we want to do? And I say that on both sides. I have a sense that, you know what, this kind of commemoration is not something that I think is right. Then I will gravitate to those scholars who share my view. Or I think that this other group, they are not right, and then I will gravitate to, and I justify myself and I feel like I am doing what I need to do because I have a source that I am referring to. But in reality, I am using that source for my own purpose. Just like there are some people, they use Allah for their own purpose. They do dua, they may even go for ziyarah, they have a hajah. And the person that they were praying for, they maybe don't get cured. The marriage that they were praying for, it doesn't take place. And then they say, ziyarah, na'udhu billah, is useless. I went all the way to Karbala, and I thought it was guaranteed, and I thought Allah does not turn anybody away. And how hard would it be for Allah to give me this one thing? Dua is an opportunity for Allah to become my servant, or dua is an opportunity for me to come and speak to Allah when I have not earned that ability to talk to Allah with my sins and my shortcomings as a human being. Is dua an opportunity for me to become a servant of Allah, or for Allah to become a servant of my whim and my desire? Reality, I am supposed to come through the excuse of saying, Ya Allah, I have a hajah, I have a need, I have a worry in my life. I bring it to your door. Now you take care of this patient. You take care of this debt. You take care of this worry in my life, for you know better than I do. I am telling you that this is what I think. I think this person should live. But in the end, they are going to die. And I am going to die as well. I think that they should be cured. But in the end, you try people in sickness, and sometimes you try them with health. Oh Allah, I think that I need this debt to be paid so I can focus on other things in my life. But I know that sometimes you try people by giving them money, and sometimes you try them by giving them poverty, and in both cases your wisdom is greater. The dua is my opportunity to approach you, not your opportunity to say, Allah, you are my butler. You are my concierge. You are my servant. So similarly, when it comes to our religion, I should not form my opinions and then say, I have a list of 5 mujtahids, they support me. But rather I should say, what is it that my religion wants from me? And then I go to those with greater knowledge and experience and wisdom in order to understand how I can implement that which my religion and my Creator has asked of me. So how can I do that? Well, you have direct access to so many stories and so many majalis. Look at the character of Ahlul Bayt. Make your priorities based on not your habit, not your comfort, not your tradition, but based on the values and on the teachings of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimus salatu wassalam. Now, if I have to find out how to perform Salatul Ayat, the prayer at divine signs, like a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, you and I can't do taqleed to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Maybe I don't speak Arabic. Alright, these days we have artificial intelligence. I can plug the hadith into ChatGPT. It'll give me sometimes a better translation than even a human translator. Sometimes it's going to make a mistake and you won't realize it. But maybe it'll give you an accurate, but still you don't have the background when there are different hadith about when to declare Eid or how to perform a particular act of worship. You cannot just say directly, I don't need taqleed, I will go and follow the ma'soom. But in the general framework of what are the priorities of the religion, your intellect, your fitrah, and what you can directly access of the stories and the example of Rasulullah and Ahlul Bayt will be your guide. Then you need to finish and fill in the details, and those details, they can come from a scholar. It said that somebody once came to Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, and said, what is your fatwa on smoking a cigarette? And he said, if you need to get a fatwa from me about whether to smoke, then your problem is not a taqleed issue. Your problem is not a fatwa. Think about your intellect, think about your humanity, think about your priorities. If you need to come to me and say, what is your fatwa? Then I can give you a fatwa, it won't make you healthy. It won't make you wise. You need to be first wise, and you need to be a good person, otherwise you can read the Quran morning till night. If you are one of the Khawarij, it will only make you more misguided. Because it is hudan lil muttaqeen. First you need to be pious, then you can get guided by the Quran. First you need to be using your intellect, and then you can benefit from taqleed. First you need to understand what were the general priorities of Ahlul Bayt, and then you will be able to find which scholars will give you guidance and which ones will just reinforce your prior assumptions and keep you at that same level that you had before. So there are two perspectives now that we have within the community of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. One is that we are Shia and this is our identity. And sometimes when we hear people criticizing Muslims, maybe we think, you know what? I agree with them. If I see somebody with too big a beard, I get scared as well. So how can I blame a non-Muslim if they get scared? When I hear Allahu Akbar, I'm not running to the masjid and remembering Allah. So why should I be bothered if Allahu Akbar is associated, God forbid, with extremism or with terrorism? My concern is Labbaik Ya Hussein. Labbaik Ya Hussein should be sacred. Allahu Akbar. I don't have that same emotional connection. There are attempts sometimes to create a separate Shi'i identity within Islam and say, you can take the main section of the house. You know, like sometimes in different countries, there is a large property that the grandfather had and somebody has taken the majority of the inheritance, and then you say, well, I'll just be happy in this small part as long as I can have my 2 rooms and kitchen and I'll be okay. You can do whatever you want with the main part of the inheritance. That is what it is like for people who say that the identity that I am emotional and passionate about is only about the followers of Ahlul Bayt or the Shia. And then the other perspective is that if the name of Rasulullah is associated with anything but the most sublime and beautiful human character, then those who are closest to the Prophet should feel the most pain. If Allahu Akbar is associated with terrorism and not with nobility and sacrifice and all of the greatest attributes of human character, then who should be the one that is most grieved and most striving to change that reality than somebody who believes in the true Tawheed taught by the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt? Who should be concerned not about that one small piece of the inheritance, but about the entirety of that inheritance? Remember, according to a narration, when Harun asked Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam, where is Fadak? Salawatu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Imam didn't say it is a small territory within Hijaz, but he said the entire border of Arabia. Harun, you want to say that you can return, now that you have a big empire, you will give me back the small territory, you will say there, I have given you your due. The Imam said Fadak was meant to be the foundation for the establishment of the true just system of governance within Islam. And if you want to return Fadak, then don't think you can give me just that corner plot and say you've gotten your inheritance. The entirety of Islam is Fadak. And in reality, even there, the Imam was kind. Otherwise, it is the entirety of God's creation for which Allah sent His Prophet as a mercy, that is part of the kingdom and the realm of authority of the Prophet and the successors of the Prophet. Europe and America and Africa and China, they were all part of Fadak. Of course, Harun was not ruling over those territories, so the Imam mentioned that part which Harun had usurped. Otherwise, even the rest of the earth, that is part of what Fadak represents. There are two perspectives. One is to say that I am only concerned about those who are my friends. If there is an injustice somewhere in the world, and people will say, are they Shia? If not, what is it my concern? Maybe some of them will be a little bit more generous. Are they Muslim? If it's a homeless person who's not Muslim, if it is somebody who is suffering who is not Muslim, what is it my concern? Some of us are even more strict. If it is somebody in a different country who is Muslim and is Shia, I don't have any concern. It's just my family and it's just my own tribe that I am concerned about. But all of them are ignorant. You don't need a mujtahid, you don't need a marja', you don't need to be a scholar. All of us know the character of our Prophet. All of us know the character of Fatima Zahra. All of us know the character of Imam Ali and Ahlul Bayt. Tell me, if there is a person who was not a Shia, would Ahlul Bayt care about or not care about their suffering or injustice that they are facing? If there was a non-Muslim, Imam Ali says that when there is a non-Muslim lady who isn't even killed, but just her jewelry is stolen, then it would not be exaggerated for a Muslim to die of grief. Imagine, Imam Ali says that an honorable Muslim, if they hear that a non-Muslim woman had her jewelry robbed from her person, then they should die of shame. And that would not be out of place. And here we have people who say, I love Imam Ali, I love Imam Hussein. It doesn't bother me if there is a war going on, as long as I know that it is not my people who are suffering. You see the difference in perspective? Go directly to the source of our actions and our role models and examples within life. And we don't need a fatwa, we don't need an ayah, we don't need a riwayah. We have so many different sources to know what was the character. In fact, if somebody says to me that Imam Ali would hear about a genocide, or he would hear about a massacre, or he would hear about suffering, he would hear about homelessness, he would hear about hunger, he would hear about people suffering, and he wouldn't care because they were not his followers, every one of us will stand up and say, why are you insulting my Imam? And then we will replicate that very behavior which we would be insulted if it was attributed to our Imam. Now some of you who are maybe online and younger, you will hear a lot of times there are these debates that are going on. And there are these terms that go, they don't speak respectfully. They say this person is Umari. This person is Bakri. This person, with some slogan, is a Nasibi. You know what I'm talking about? Hopefully, if you say you don't know what I'm talking about, that means that you are not online too much, and that's a good thing. But these debates, they exist in every language: English, Urdu, Arabic, Farsi now. And sometimes people say, well, I'm defending Ahlul Bayt. And sometimes, they even add a little bit of a latmiya or matam, and it's like this point was unanswered and it won the debate, and this is a defense of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. This is a defense of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Okay, look now at the character. Find me that hadith where Imam Ali used these slogans and spoke in an insulting manner about his enemies. Instead, I will find a hadith when Imam Ali saw his soldiers who were going to fight a vicious enemy, speaking ill of them, saying, Inni akrahu lakum an takunu sabbabin. I don't like it for you, according to one translation, to be people who speak ill and use language that is not worthy of me. Don't hide history. If there were enemies of Ahlul Bayt, describe what they did. But describe it in a way that will bring people insight and guidance, not that will increase polarization. Now sometimes people, they respond and they say, no, but there are people who accept the truth because of this. If you speak moderately, then it doesn't go viral. That person who uses this very provocative manner, they have tens of thousands of followers and views, and I know people who have converted to the truth, to Islam, because of that debate against a non-Muslim religion, to the school of Ahlul Bayt, because of that provocative debate against the enemies of Ahlul Bayt. So this is effective. But a wise person doesn't just look at the benefit, they also look at the harm. Maybe one person will convert and you will say, wow, this is such a success. But 10 people, now they will become enemies and they will now even maybe oppress, maybe even harm the followers of Ahlul Bayt. You are very happy that your investment went up 10%, but you are ignoring the fact that if you had made another investment, it would have gone up 1,000%. You have not profited, you have lost. If you do a benefit and harm analysis, then you are not in benefit. And if you don't do the benefit and harm analysis and look at your interests, but you look at the practice and the character of Ahlul Bayt, then you will not find in the character of our Prophet and Imam Ali and Fatima Zahra that they would speak in that manner, that they would increase polarization, but rather that they would do so in a way that would bring people together. The final point that I will make about this topic is that we always look at the current state. Because we think that we are in a competition or we are in a battle in the present time. But Ahlul Bayt, what they taught us above all else is to look across the limitations of geography and across the limitations of time and history. Ours is a struggle for the elevation of humanity. I'm not trying to convert people tonight, but I am trying to bring people closer to the guidance of Ahlul Bayt over the long haul. The more polarization there is, the more difficult that struggle will be. This is why there were those who opposed the Prophet's treaty in Hudaybiyah. And I don't have time to go through the history, but why was there opposition? They said that we came with ihram for Umrah and now you are saying, Rasulullah, that we will not do Umrah until next year? Those of you who have been for Umrah, you know how worried you are that am I going to do everything right? Will my Umrah or my Hajj be valid, or will my whole life now be upside down? So we're not going to do the Umrah. And we are going to return to Medina. And if a Muslim flees Medina to go to Mecca, then that person will not be returned. But if somebody comes and flees Mecca as a Muslim, and their guardian, their wali says they need to be returned, then they will be returned. This is a defeat, not a victory. Allah reveals, Inna fatahna laka fatham mubina. Oh Allah, we have given you a clear victory. And many Muslims say that this is going to cause us a great doubt, or it caused us the greatest doubt that we have ever experienced. Why? Because they were looking and saying to Rasulullah that we have come with Umrah. We have 1,400 people. We have done the calculation. If we're going to fight, we will win. Quraysh has lost their confidence in the 6th year of Hijrah. And they were right. If the Prophet were fighting a military battle, they would have been right. But the Prophet was fighting a spiritual battle to bring the hearts of people closer to Islam. One of the statements, even though it wasn't equal, was that any tribe that wants to be an ally with the Prophet can become an ally, and Quraysh will not stop them. One of the traits was that yes, if a Muslim flees Makkah to go to Medina and the guardian claims them back, they will be returned. But Islam will not be prevented from being proclaimed in Makkah. And Quraysh agrees that Muslims will be able to announce their religion and practice their religion. The people who had expelled the Muslims and they had to go to Habasha in migration. The people who had marginalized and boycotted the Prophet and Banu Hashim in Shi'b Abi Talib are now agreeing that Islam will be practiced without restriction in Makkah. If you look with a spiritual lens, not today and tomorrow, but across time and across history, then you will understand that it is not just a matter of faith. Inna fatahna laka fatham mubina. It is a clear and visible victory. If you have a spiritual lens. But if you have a material lens, then it might be fath, but it's not fath mubin. It can't be a clear victory. Why? Because the victory is ambiguous? No. Because your eyes have cataracts and they have an obstacle preventing them from seeing. Some people say that Fatima Zahra alayhi salam was oppressed, and therefore we cannot make any kind of peace with those who oppressed her. The oppression of Fatima Zahra was that powerful symbol that established truth from falsehood and was meant to be a source to hold a camera, to hold a candle, to hold a mirror to the Muslims to recognize where is truth and where is falsehood. It was not meant to be a polarization within the ummah, but it was meant to be that very visible reality that would remove the propaganda and the curtains that oppressive governments may wish to set up to prevent people from seeing the truth. Now it is up to me how I mourn and how I grieve, whether I put up curtains or I remember the daughter of the Prophet in the way that it was intended. Sahih Bukhari tells us that she never did bay'at. Sahih al-Bukhari tells us that she never made her peace with those who had oppressed her until she left this world. This is meant not for me to use it as a hammer against those people who are ignorant, but rather to ask them, tell me, what do you think of the daughter of the Prophet? Forget the details. You think that the history was one way, but tell me, if she didn't pledge allegiance, and if she said that she died angry, then was she right or was she wrong? Does she belong in heaven? Na'udhu billah, or are you going to leave Islam and attribute to the daughter of the Prophet something which no Muslim should ever be able to even imagine? This is up to us. Yes, that oppression was the greatest oppression that ever took place in humanity. But it was meant to remove the curtains. We should not remember it in a way that is so emotional and that is so prejudiced that we make it into an obstacle to bring people towards the truth. Now some people say that, well, people reject it. Don't worry. If they don't see it today, then maybe they will see it in 10 years. If they don't see it in 10 years, then maybe their children will see it or their grandchildren will see it. That is the reality of the path of Ahlul Bayt. Those who kept alive the memory of Sayyidah Zahra and her oppression, they were able to light the torch of Islam, even in the court of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad and even in the court of Yazid in Damascus, in spite of his army and his wealth and his power. Salawatu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The oppression of Sayyidah Zahra is meant for us to come closer to her. And we have that example from her own children. The narration is from both Imam Hassan and Sayyidah Zainab alayhim as-salam, that we used to see our mother stay awake all night in prayer. And even though they were young children, they wanted to see what was their mother saying. So beautiful were her words and her state that children would forget their own sleep and they would say that we would just come and sit down or lay down next to Fatima Zahra and hear her dua and watch her tears as they fell on the face of her children as she prayed. And her children tell us that we heard her from the beginning of night until the end. She would do dua, not one dua for herself, but dua for others, for her neighbors, for her fellow Muslims, for those who had lost martyrs in battle, for those who had suffered, those who were in need, for those who had come to her and said, "O daughter of the Prophet, we are poor, we are in need, we are suffering, pray for us." The entire prayer would be only for those who were suffering. And it said that Imam Hassan, he said at the end of the night as dawn began to break, that, "Oh my mother, tell me, you spent hours in prayer and you didn't pray for yourself." This is the love that the daughter of the Prophet had for the ummah of her father. Those very same people who did not fulfill their obligation to her, look at how she prays and how she is merciful to them. The Quran says about her father, Rasulullah, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. It is as if, O Messenger, you are going to allow yourself to die of grief that the mushriks are not becoming Muslim. The Prophet loved the mushrikeen so much that he wanted them to become believers, and it would grieve him that they rejected his. He didn't say they are my enemies. He said they are my potential followers. Their children are my potential followers. This is what Fatima Zahra was teaching her children. That yes, the mushrikeen oppressed my father. And yes, these Muslims, they did not fulfill their duty towards me. But they are potential followers, and if they are not, then their children will be. What greater gift could the Muslims have than the presence of such a pure daughter of the Prophet, whose character was the character of the Prophet, whose prayer was as if it was coming from the lips of the Prophet, who after the death of the Prophet could be said to preserve the spirit of the Prophet among the Muslims. Yesterday we mentioned that first stage of the grief and the musibah of Fatima when she lost her mother. Today let us remember that second stage of her grief, and we can say the second stage of her own martyrdom when she lost her own father, the messenger of God. It is a custom that even people who don't believe in God and even people who are not Muslims, when somebody dies, they say, give comfort to their family. Those who may not be Muslim but they believe in God, they say, I am praying for you. And even people who don't believe in God, they don't believe in prayer, they say, my heart and my thoughts are with you. Imagine the ummah of the Prophet. Fatima Zahra is grieving now. Her father has died and nobody comes to offer condolences. Nobody comes to say, Fatima Zahra, accept our prayers. They didn't say that our prayers or even our thoughts are with you. Rasulullah has been martyred and now Fatima Zahra is alone. One incident after the martyrdom of after the death of the Prophet illustrates how alone Sayyidah Fatima was. It is said that after Imam Ali had prepared the body of the Prophet for burial and had buried the Prophet, then Imam Ali and Fatima Zahra, they went door to door among the Ansar and said, what happened to your allegiance in Ghadir Khum? What happened to your loyalty? And do you know what answer the Ansar gave? They said that, oh Abu al-Hasan, oh Fatima Zahra, we have already given our allegiance to somebody else. If you had come yesterday, then we would have followed you. And Imam Ali said that should I have left the body of the Prophet on his bed and come and told you to fulfill your obligation? And that is when Sayyidah Fatima spoke. She said, "Ma sana Abu al-Hasan illa ma kana yanbaghi lah." My husband, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he did exactly what he should have done. That was when we were in grief. The body of the Prophet was lying on the bed, and it was the duty of Imam Ali to prepare the body for burial. It was the duty of the Ummah to come and offer their obedience to Imam Ali and to offer their condolences and their support to the daughter of the Prophet. When Fatima Zahra says to the Ansar that, "What do you mean if I had come yesterday you would have followed me? If you are not even aware of what it means for my father no longer to be alive, and if you do not respect the funeral of my father, then how would you ever offer your obedience or your loyalty to Ahlul Bayt?" It is as if you have not understood even the first thing about the message of Rasulullah. And so Fatima Zahra, she mourned the death of the Prophet. And even those tears were something that the Muslims could not make their peace with. You have all heard of Baytul Ahzan. The people of Medina came and they didn't say, "Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, oh Abu al-Hasan, we are apologizing that we didn't offer you our support." They didn't come and say, "We are apologizing that we never offered condolences to the daughter of the Prophet." They say, "We hear Fatima Zahra weeping and it is making us unable to do our own daily business. We are not able to take care of our affairs. Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, tell Fatima Zahra if she can mourn and grieve quietly so we can go about our daily lives." And Amir al-Mu'mineen, he said, "How can I tell Fatima Zahra to keep her tears in a way that nobody will hear?" He prepared a place called Baytul Ahzan, and that is where the first majalis for the Prophet were conducted. And this sunnah and practice of mourning for the death of those who were chosen by Allah was established by Fatima Zahra. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Oh Allah, we ask you to bring justice to all of the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, and in particular those who oppressed Fatima Zahra alayha salam. Oh Allah, her martyrdom, her suffering, and her sacrifice was in order to make clear the path of truth from guidance from falsehood and misguidance. Oh Allah, allow us to remember her in a way that brings people closer to the truth and closer to Ahlul Bayt, and not in a way that causes hatred or polarization or division. Oh Allah, allow us not only to honor Ahlul Bayt, but to follow their character and their example. Oh Allah, I ask you to forgive our shortcomings and to guide us in our actions and in our lives. Oh Allah, make us worthy of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad in our life, so that you can unite us with Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad in the hereafter. Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
Salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Hussein, 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 Hussein,
Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira. Everyone, Ya Sayyida, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra. Everyone, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra. Oh, the purest of light, an example of dignity and might. How can we not shed a tear for you when we see the pain that you had went through? Ya Zahra, everyone. Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya From a young age, you have faced tyranny, felt great pain as you lost your baby, suffered sorrow as your father left you, yet you stayed strong. We wish to be like you, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, everyone, Ya Sayyidatun Nisa al-Alamin, your mother, the Arab's uncrowned queen. You're the center of the pure Ahlul Bayt, chief of all those mentioned ladies so great. Ya Zahra, Ya by Mawla's side, after Rasulullah, you stood up to the thugs of Medina. When the door came crushing down on you, Mohsin taken cruelly away from you. Ya Zahra, Ya never been seen outside without your garb. Even in death, you showed the true hijab. But your daughters, unveiled for all to see, also uncovered your son's headless body. Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra,
Ya Zahra.
What can I say? There'll be a day, turn into night will day. The sky will weep Fatima, 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 everyone. Fatima, 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 Fatima. Today has come the day the world will lose its way. Muhammad is betrayed as Fatima is slain. Today has come the day the world will lose its way. Muhammad is betrayed as Fatima is slain. They push at the door, she falls to the floor. Mohsen is no more, the sky will weep Fatima, 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 Fatima,
Fatima, Fatima,
Fatima, Fatima, Fatima, Fatima, everyone.
Fatima,
Fatima, Fatima, Fatima.
Fatima, Fatima.
The rose that is fragrant, attacked by the Satans. Oh, Ali, bear patience, your heart is left vacant. The rose that is fragrant, attacked by the Satans. Oh, Ali, bear patience, your heart is left vacant. The night turns to day, angels look away. As has come that day, the sky will weep. Fatima, 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 Fatima,
Fatima, Fatima.
Fatima, 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 Fatima,
Fatima, Fatima.
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 Her bruised face she hides, Ali weeps and cries. An unborn child dies as the flames start to rise. Her bruised face she hides, Ali weeps and cries. An unborn child dies as the flames start to rise. Her ribs leave their mark, the nail played its part. As Zahra departs, the sky will weep. Fatima, 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 Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira, Ya Sayyida, Ya Tahira.
Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra. ارے میری بیوی، اے میری بیوی، تیرے در پہ استغاثہ ہے، تیرا ممنون میری شہزادی، یہ جہاں سارا ہے. یا زہرا، یا زہرا، تو ہمیں حفظ اور امان دے دے، اپنی چادر کا سائے باندھے دے. تیری قدرت میں کیا نہیں بی بی، تو جسے چاہے دو جہاں دے دے. یا زہرا، یا زہرا، یا تجھ کو امت نے یوں ستایا ہے، مر کے محسن پہ بھی رلایا ہے. تجھ کو بابا کے بعد امت نے ہائے دربار میں بلایا ہے. یا زہرا، یا زہرا، فرش مجلس پہ اور مصلی پر ہر جوان کہہ رہا ہے رو رو کر، ہم رہے نہ رہے مگر بی بی، تا قیامت رہے غم سرور. یا زہرا، یا کربلا میں تیری شبی بن کر اپنے بابا کی زندگی بن کر تیرا بچپن ہے سکینہ بی بی اور جوانی ہے زینب مزتر یا زہرا
جن کی راہوں سے پیغمبر نے ہٹائے کانٹے، 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 ہر قدم پر انہی لوگوں نے بچھائے کانٹے، جن کی راہوں سے پیغمبر نے ہٹائے کانٹے، زندگی میں جو ستم ڈھائے وہی کیا کم تھے، بعد مرنے کے جو پہلو میں رکھائے کانٹے، جن کی راہوں سے پیغمبر نے ہٹائے کانٹے، خار پھر خار ہے، فطرت ہے اذیت دینا، پہلوئے گل سے کوئی کاش ہٹائے کانٹے، جن کی راہوں سے پیغمبر نے ہٹائے کانٹے، اہل گلشن کی نگاہوں میں سدا کھٹکیں گے، لاکھ پھولوں میں رہے ہیں تو پرائے کانٹے، جن کی راہوں سے پیغمبر نے ہٹائے کانٹے، وائے ہو امت مرحومہ تیری قسمت پر، گل کے ہوتے ہوئے دامن میں سجائے کانٹے، جن کی راہوں سے پیغمبر نے ہٹائے کانٹے، گھر جلانے کو چلے آئے نبی زادی کا، گھر جلانے کو چلے آئے نبی نبی راہ کے سائے کانٹے جن کی راہوں سے پیغمبر نے
ہٹائے کانٹے
دیکھ کر داشت مصیبت میں گلے زہرا کو نیزتانے ہوئے ہر سو نکل آئے کانٹے جن کی راہوں سے حسین حسین
حسین حسین حسین حسین حسین حسین حسین حسین حسین حسین اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد